Hi, this is Matt Payne and my presentation for disaster management in Mexico for Dr. Janet Dilling's PAD 5835 International Comparative and Disaster Management. So, why does Mexico respond to disasters the way it does? For those of you who speak Spanish, por qué is why, and if you change the punctuation a little bit, it's actually an answer of because. So it's a conversation in and of itself. So September 19th, 1985, Mexico was struck by a 8.1 magnitude earthquake that wreaked a good bit of havoc on the country, especially on Mexico City. And throughout the years, they have adopted a day of national public earthquake drill. It's kind of a national day of public awareness for the different types of disasters, specifically earthquakes, in remembrance of that specific one. They hold it every year annually on September 19th. And coincidentally, on the 32nd anniversary in 2017, they were hit by a 7.1 magnitude earthquake that did a good bit of damage. I've included the Richter scale up here in the top right hand corner because I wanted people to be able to look at the Richter scale and actually see kind of what it represents. The 1985 earthquake is going to fall between the serious damage over large areas and the devastating damage over huge areas. It's going to fall between those two categories, closer to the lesser of the two evils. And then on the 32nd anniversary in 2017, it's going to fall just below that, and potential for destructive tremors and serious damage over large areas. So not a great big difference between the two when you think about it, but definitely a big deal. Over the last decade, Mexico has become increasingly vulnerable to natural hazards. Now, this isn't just um, due to one factor. This is due to the evolving climate, the different types of weather patterns that we're getting in the Western Hemisphere, and specifically in and along the equator over in the Western Hemisphere. But this is also due to the population increase and the population density change throughout Mexico. So their plan and response. Mexico obviously has a confused response because they are, I mean, everybody kind of sees the stereotypical, you know, movies and cliches about Mexico that they're okay, they can handle themselves, but they're not necessarily the best. Um, so Mexico obviously has a confused response, and it actually is proven. The federal government, while they oversee things like the National Disaster Preparedness Day, and oversee the drills that take place across the country, they don't have the ability to manage everything. So the local governments are still going to be able to request aid when they need it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the federal government is going to be able to provide the aid that the local governments are requesting. Now, Mexico is obviously going to be facing a lot of the same disasters as any other country in the Western Hemisphere, specifically those between and around the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. Um, Anywhere along in between those two and around those two, um, you're going to be facing pretty much hurricanes, severe weather, thunderstorms, heavy rainfall, earthquakes, tsunamis, flooding, and tidal surges. Those are pretty much all the weather patterns that are being faced and the cascading events that come from them. Now, tsunamis, flooding, and tidal surge can be considered cascading events, but obviously they are considered disasters in and of themselves. Industrial disasters like fires and explosions, I like to throw that in there because Mexico is an industrial country that they are developing. They have many plants, many factories, many different types of industrial sites there that pose disasters or disaster potential. So, what have they done? SASMEX, the Seismic Alert System of Mexico. This is a system that emergency managers will use throughout Mexico to detect seismic activity. Now, with Mexico bordering both the Atlantic I say the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico on the eastern border, and then the Pacific on the western border. They have to watch out on both sides. Um, so it detects any seismic activity and lets them know how strong it is, about where it's at, and what to expect. That way they can prepare for the potential cascading events such as tsunamis, flooding, tidal surges, even the shock once it reaches the country and the aftershocks that can come after that. Now, who is they that I've been talking about? This is the federal, state, and local governments, NGOs. There are a lot. The big players here are the federal, state, and local governments. They are the three that really kind of control the situation. Um, and then the military use for certain situations, specifically in aid transportation, evacuations, and the search and rescue when disaster strikes, building collapses, floods, stuff like that. The military will go in and try to help locate missing persons. International and aid response, the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement, the UN and other foreign aid. I know we're not supposed to really talk about the United States a whole lot, but this one actually plays a good part because the U.S., Mexico, and Canada have an agreement. Formerly, it was the North American Free Trade Agreement that it helped boost economies. Well, there's also a little clause in there about foreign disaster aid that if disaster strikes and these two countries are able to help another country, that they are not necessarily obligated to, but they are definitely urged to do so. Mexico being a member of the UN, they can also go to the United Nations and ask for aid. And in the United Nations, they can develop relationships with other countries that allow them to also request even more foreign aid. Lastly, the problems and overcoming. So, what's the holdup? Well, Mexico being in a tropical area, they're going to get hit back to back with storms and disasters, and there's just a lot that goes on, and they get hit back to back before they can ever recover. So, they get hit with one, they try to start the recovery process, and then boom, they're getting hit again. And it happens a lot. It happens more often than not. Comparable aid is hard to receive repeatedly, so these countries get tired of sending aid to Mexico, and Mexico's not sending anything back. So it kind of it's like we're helping you, but you never help us. So it's almost like that one-way street. It really gets hard for countries to continue sending aid. Um, so it's important for us to use past events as a guide for what works well and what doesn't. I like to say the definition of insanity is the same, doing the same thing repeatedly, expecting different results. So you can't do the same thing in disaster and emergency management and expect different results when it's the same situation. Um, so we're able to look at past events and past disasters and what happened, and we're able to establish a pattern of what should be done and what we should avoid. Because hey, this worked really well, let's keep doing this. Or this didn't work, and like we thought it would, so let's change it. Let's try something different. Mexican authorities learned some hard lessons through some botched and inadequate responses to disasters like Hurricane Patricia in 2015. Um, Again, it kind of showed them what works, what doesn't work. The National Disaster Preparedness Day, seasonal planning, when patterns are established, it's easier for them to plan. Um, so to be able to study things in the past, and it allows us to kind of see the pattern, and it allows us to set the pattern and be able to predict when it's going to happen again, if it's going to happen again. And we can also learn from human behavioral patterns before, during, and after the disasters. Believe it or not, humans are probably one of the most not volatile but variant factors in emergency management, and we have to study human behavior, and that's going to be one of the biggest objects